And we're going to go in absolute order, just down the row. So Bruce, 5 to 8 minutes. And again, everybody, you have question forms on the table, and believe me, nothing is off limits. So, except profanity and bad handwriting. So, Bruce, you're up for 5 to 8 minutes. Let's go.
Thank you, Paul. Hey, what a great crowd. Thank you, everybody, for, is this coming on? Can you hear all right? Good. Thank you all for coming out today. And Jay, I do notice, I'm glad that Jim Kirk is right here. I assume that that means for the post-election Sun Times panel that we get a seat in spitball distance. See him. Done? All right. And Judy Bart Topinka, who should have been governor. Judy, I still remember that endorsement was as close to an indictment of an incumbent as we've ever written. And it turned out that he was indicted. I'll talk a little bit about the governor's race as we see it. I think what we're seeing in this race is a fight between all those folks in government and politics who grew up with Jim Edgar and Jim Thompson and George Ryan against essentially the business folks who, after 2010, just said something's got to change in the Republican Party. It's a fight over what's left of the Republican Party in the state. They saw Bill Brady lose an election in what was otherwise a big Republican year, and they saw the party get marginalized in the House and Senate. And I started hearing from a lot of business folks back in 2011, 2012, saying they understand we need to find one candidate. We need to back one candidate. They weren't necessarily sure that it should be Bruce Rauner. I think a lot of people who know him, a lot of people who like him, think that he has an edge that may not wear well with voters over time. But what Rauner did was there's been all this focus on the money that he himself put into the campaign. But I think people tend to forget that a year ago now, before anybody else was really getting started, he had raised more than $1 million from other folks. And that was before he really started. He'd only put a little less than a $250,000 himself in. When Ron Gidwitz jumped from Dillard to Rauner, that was a massive signal for the folks who might have been holding out in the business community that here's the candidate, this is the one that you're going to back. And you saw this guy raise money, and I think it wasn't just that business folks were lining up with him, were contributing to him, but they were not hedging their bets. I mean, you look at contribution lists for the other candidates, they weren't going to give Kirk Dillard the money that he needed that they might have naturally given to him to run. I remember one of Bill Brady's top people, and talking to him in 2011 or 2012, and I said, is Brady going to run it again? He said, you have to talk him out of it. I said, well, that's not my job. But they were telling Brady even then, you're going to have a hard time raising money. You can run again, and we've seen that happen. The Tribune poll showed that some 40% of Republican primary voters don't know anything about Bill Brady. Now, he was their candidate for governor 4 years ago. That's what happens. That's how easy it is to go back undercover when you don't have money to run. I don't think the race is over. We're a week out. The Tribune poll, Nick Panagakis is here, who conducted the poll, showed some Dillard movement. I think with a first-time candidate like Rauner, you don't have any built-in loyalty from voters. They're still trying to size you up. I did see as soon as the poll was out that he started running a negative ad on Kirk Dillard that looked like it could be pretty effective. But there's, especially with a low turnout election and that lack of loyalty, if I were Rauner, I would be running as though I was behind. I got to say something about him, and we did endorse him. I'm not here to use the city club to promote an endorsement of a candidate, but for a first-time candidate, he is remarkably disciplined. I know he had his hiccups on minimum wage, but now I've grilled him twice, 90 minutes at the editorial board, and Kristen was there, and 60 minutes on the WGN debate that we did last week with Micah Mater, and that guy is remarkably focused on what he wants to say in that kind of a setting. And then the thing with Dillard is that Kirk known him forever, and he's so genteel than when he's calling Rauner a rat like he did during the WGN debate. You do a double take. It sounded like, well, was he talking about his economic plan, or did he just call the guy a rat? He sounds so nice and calm that there's a lot of Jim Edgar in him. Do you remember when Edgar ran? Edgar always sounded so gentlemanly when he accused Dawn Clark Netsch of unleashing murderers on your children, but effective. One thing about Edgar, you notice his campaign fund just kicked in $25,000 to Dillard. Dillard's playing a lot of catch-up. There's a sign. Jim Edgar is sitting on $500,000 in his campaign fund. He wrote a check last year. He just wrote $25,000 now. Where you been? Dillard is your guy. It's just another sign that why Dillard is having a lot of trouble in playing catch up now. The other thing that struck me from the WGN debate that we did was Dan Rutherford. When you're doing that debate and you've got the producers in your ear, they were being very careful in trying to be even-handed in how much time each candidate got. It was really hard to get Rutherford to say anything. We kept getting the buzz in the ears. You've got to give that question to Rutherford. Give the question to Rutherford. It just seemed that he didn't really want to participate. And when he said during that debate he wished he had the concession for peanuts, it seemed like that. He was just playing out the string. I thought Brady was much more effective this time than he was 4 years ago as a candidate. A much better focus on what he wants to say, and he's not getting tripped up on baby or puppy killing legislation like he did then. So you look at the Tribune poll, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kristen. Tribune poll shows some movement. What the Tribune poll showed to me, though, was that Rauner has done a very effective job through his ads with connecting with people. When you ask who can relate to ordinary people, Rauner wins hands down. When you ask who is a better leader, now nobody has actually seen him in a leadership position. He's been running his company, and yet Rauner wins on leadership as well. So it has not just, to me, been the money that he had in this race, but it's been a fairly effective message in campaign. Kristen.
Thank you for having us. We have a motto at the editorial board. We talk to the politicians so you don't have to. But that motto is particularly relevant as we wrap up our endorsements for the March 18th primary. And I know you're all really worried about that Metropolitan Water Reclamation District race. Luckily, we got your back. That endorsement is on the page today. You're welcome. We do devote a lot of time and resources to endorsements. I did a little math before heading over here, and I've interviewed almost 100 candidates during the past month. And you know what? I like to do it. It's a privilege to catch up with incumbents and to meet challengers, many of them first-time candidates, who have the courage to run for office. There are a few races we're watching closely because they represent a broader direction for the state. We're watching the 26th House District race. It stretches all the way from Streeterville to 79th Street, and it's represented by freshman Christian Mitchell. Mitchell voted for pension reform, and so the unions hope to make an example out of him and defeat him, even though he took the right vote for the future of the state. Given the dangerously underfunded pensions in the city and the Chicago Public Schools, we have to be honest about the need to support candidates who are willing to take votes continuously for further pension reform. Tomorrow, the city of Chicago goes into the bond market to sell up to $400 million in bonds, borrowing. How much more will the bonds cost taxpayers due to the latest downgrade of the city's credit rating to 3 notches above junk status? A downgrade that a Moody's analyst attributed to, quote, massive and growing unfunded pension liabilities which threaten the city's fiscal solvency. The size of Chicago's unfunded pension liabilities makes it an extreme outlier. We need people in Springfield, like Christian Mitchell, who are willing to be realistic and honest and urgent about pension reform. That's why we endorsed Peter Breen in the 48th House District. We're also watching 2 suburban races where incumbents Ron Sandak and Ed Sullivan face challenges from the right because they switched their positions on same-sex marriage and voted in favor of it. We supported their change of heart. They have strong fiscal records in Springfield, and we hope voters send them back. Some people, Rich Miller, are confused sometimes by our endorsement process. But it's not really that complicated. There are no litmus tests for our endorsements. As you probably know, the editorial page has been howling about the need for pension reform for literally years. But we endorsed Republicans who voted against the pension reform law, and we didn't endorse some Democrats who voted for it. We look for candidates who have ideas, real ideas on how to fix state government. We look for candidates who are sincere and thoughtful and independent. We look for candidates who are gutsy. And in the primary, that means we're throwing our support behind candidates who philosophically couldn't be more different than our page's platform. And that's okay, that's good. One of my favorite candidates this cycle is a feisty newcomer from Mokina named Nicole Serban. She's a Democrat. She thinks state government needs more money, and she would raise more money by legalizing recreational use of marijuana. So obviously, we differ from her greatly, but she's smart, she's knowledgeable, and I was happy to recommend her for an endorsement. On the other hand, we had a candidate running for Congress who didn't know the difference between Medicaid, Medicare, and Obamacare. So that was pretty much a deal breaker. We know endorsements are only a small part of elections. We don't expect voters to follow our lead in every race. We're just giving you one more tool in the toolbox to help you decide. And I'll close because I know you're all waiting to hear from this guy. Journalists, especially those covering politics, we get wrapped often for being too cynical, skeptical, curmudgeonly, and that's probably fair to a certain extent. But I actually think the opposite is true. I think reporters who cover Illinois politics are perpetually optimistic, sometimes irrationally so. We want this state to be a place again where families and businesses are moving to, not from. I am invested here. I am hopeful that state government will learn to spend within its means so that the truly vulnerable people who live here can rely on government for help. That is not happening right now. I'm hopeful every election day that strong independent candidates get sent to Springfield, and it's a privilege and an honor to be part of the Tribune's efforts to make that happen.
Dold's a big shot. Kristen, that was well prepared.
Well done.
South Suburban girl, just so you know. Go ahead.
Okay, everyone, I'll keep it short. I have a portrait in my office, some of you know, of Mayor Rahm Emanuel trying to look like he's an Italian guy, and in a movie. And that portrait sometimes talks to me, and he gave me a message for all of you. The Rahm father asked me to thank you all for those of you, and you know who you are, who went on social media and anonymously, of course, because we all know you're brave, and applauded his 8-part CNN campaign commercial and said how wonderful it was. All right. I just had to take care of that. Jerry Kern, my boss, sometimes likes to bedevil me by sending me into different places when I least expect it. He called me up a couple years ago. He said, you're going to Greece and Turkey. I'm like, really? Okay. And then a few months ago, he called and said, you're going to Sochi. And I really enjoyed both of those trips because if you study politics, and all of you do, you go into a place that you're unfamiliar with, and you try to get a sense of things. And I was thinking, as Bruce and Kristen were talking, and before when we decided what we were going to say, basically generally, that what if I had been sent here to Illinois from a different place, like Finland, which has a very clean government? And what would I see? I would see the Illinois of 10 years ago. It's the same place. It really, I mean, we're in debt, right? People are leaving, businesses are going, and you have the same players. We have Pat Quinn running again. You know what you're getting. Same thing. Same. Who else? Brady. Same thing. Anything different, really? I mean, I'm glad he didn't start his campaign killing puppies like Bruce noted, but really, nothing. Let's see, Dillard. The last gasp of the Thompson-Edgar people. And if he does use union support to win this primary, I can't wait to see the party, with Cellini and Shalander there and other people just saying, put the band back together. Let's borrow some more money and keep the state running. And then there's this other guy, I forgot to mention Rutherford. The fact is with Rutherford, he's a nice fellow. But I think he anticipated, as did some in this room, people who are involved in politics, that there was going to be some problem. And it happened. I mean, I don't think it might have been a surprise to voters. I don't think it was a surprise to many reporters who cover it and political consultants. And then, of course, there is Rauner. If I had come to this state from another place, I would see the political group that always ran things for the oligarchs having lost their confidence, as Bruce mentioned. And the oligarchs have decided we can't let the state go into the toilet anymore. So they've put one up of their own to run. I'm kind of intrigued by it. I think that he has problems as a candidate. The other day, he said, to Natasha Korecki, I'm not in the 1%, I'm in the 0.001%. Okay? Enough, don't talk about yourself, Bruce, okay? Just give me some advice. Talk about what your plans are, because I think they're pretty interesting. Now, if he does get through this thing, we're gonna see an amazing and important campaign. If he does get through, we're gonna see two visions of Illinois. Of course, it's gonna be bloody and it will be emotional, and you're gonna have appeals to emotion and appeals to the bottom line. But we're finally gonna have a debate over where are we going in this state? Which way are we going? I have two sons. One, at least he's not a liberal, okay? But he wants to be a teacher, all right? He wants to be a teacher. My other son wants to be a businessman, all right? And he said, when I finish at IU, I don't know if I'm coming home. And I said, what do you mean? You don't know if you're coming home? Well, the economics, is nothing like being lectured by an 18-year-old, about economics and the future of, right when I dropped $200 for a pair of soccer shoes, he's talking to me about, extravagant spending by the state. But the fact is that a lot of these kids are nervous, and so are parents. So we're going to see a fight over the vision and the future of this state. I can't wait. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention, I didn't even hit on the Carruthers thing or leave it in the envelope is still on the ballot, right? Derek Smith, leave it in the envelope, still on the ballot. Great, Illinois, that's awesome. But the Senate race, Dick Durbin, I know everyone's saying that this guy, Truex, can't even win the primary. Republicans don't want to fund him. If he gets through the primary, something happens. Say he gets through and Rauner is the candidate and stirs things up. I'm just pitching my column to the editors now. I haven't written it yet. You might see, because styles make fights. If you know boxing, Skinny Sheehan knows boxing. If styles make fights, and it just could be, that Durbin, maybe it's wishful thinking. I shouldn't say that. I just did, right? All right. So anyway, that's it for me. I'm by the way, thank you for having us, and I guess we'll take some questions.
If you have a question, raise it up, and we have the young folks coming through. Make sure you drop your cards in there, and since those over-the-top plugs for the debate on GN, just want to remind everybody the City Club debate on WTTW is on Thursday night, the final debate, despite what Mike Flannery said on Channel 32 on Sunday, and there's still room. And of course, following tonight, we have one of John's favorites, a salute to Ed Burke, and they're
Second smartest man in politics, Mike Madigan and Ed Burke. I think the two smartest guys.
that'll be our part of our introduction. Thanks, John.
Say hello to them for me.
May have to reverse a little bit of the order, but nevertheless, that's tonight, and there's still room. So, first question comes from Gerardo Cardenas. All right. AARP. It's about young people. No. Here we go. Anyone jump up like the old College Bowl. Recently, the Civic Federation proposal extending the income tax hike for 1 year and taxing retirees. How likely are these issues to be part of the governor's race moving forward?
I'll defer to the editorial board on this.
I don't think you're ever going to get a bill passed anywhere close that would tax retirees. I think there's an interesting discussion to have about whether you extend sales taxes to services, and I think you might build some support for that if you brought income and sales tax rates down and extended it to services. Now, remember, that doesn't go anywhere because you'd be taxing legal fees, and there are more lawyers per square inch in Springfield than anywhere.
Okay, that was Chris Roebling. Raise your hand, Chris. They all know you're there. Our treasurer of the City Club and our DRI, designated Republican introducer. That is his real name. If Rauner wins, what will he get done with Madigan and Cullerton? If anyone up here knew that, chances are you're not going to say it now, right?
I actually think if Rauner wins, he'll meet with Madigan and they'll do some things. Madigan is not, as one of us said, I think earlier, maybe today or a day ago, Madigan is not totally in love with the unions. I think it was Bruce. And I think that's correct. And I think that for all the, my criticism of Madigan is about his absolute control and making money off the Republican oligarchy, and they support the Democratic machine that way. But he's also smart enough to cut a deal, and I do think that that's what Rauner does, cut deals. So I think eventually strong personalities like that, as opposed to weak personalities, might do something. I don't know.
I think just as it looked.
I was just going to say, so the more I cover Illinois politics, the less I think Mike Madigan cares, who's governor. He really cares about keeping his majority, and so as long as somebody just kind of stays out of his way, this big clash that everyone is kind of predicting, I don't see coming to fruition.
I did an event with Governor Thompson last week at Elmhurst College. We got talking about term limits, and the governor was arguing against, the four-term governor was arguing against term limits. And his argument was that if you would not have gotten pension reform if you hadn't had an all-powerful speaker, Michael Madigan, to force that through the legislature. My argument in return was you wouldn't have had a pension crisis if you had 20 years of that kind of power and lack of responsibility. I think that kind of frames this election. A Rauner win is just going to be a shockwave. Now, point two, if I
just so you know, I just have to interject. Everyone who clapped there, Mike knows who you are now.
He knew about it before they clapped. But
you look at the circus in Wisconsin, where they were contributing to Illinois tourism because all their legislators were coming to Illinois to hide out. Now look at Wisconsin today. They have $1 billion surplus. They have a fully funded pension fund. They have unemployment rates that would be the great envy of Illinois, and they have a governor who's 6 or 7 points up in the last poll on his reelection. But it was chaos. It sure looked like chaos a year or two ago.
And being investigated on his emails. Okay, from a previous job. False, totally false.
That's another show.
Another show. Oh, well, we have someone about the term limits will become a reality. We kind of answered that question. Here's one of the longest questions, but because it is printed in really neat printing, look at that, it's beautiful. Mark Showerty, Denton Law Firm, looking ahead to the general election in November. Oh, this is going to, Bruce, this could be for you. Are there any analogies you think are fitting from past elections for the upcoming campaign and the contrast between the candidates, assuming Rauner is the GOP nominee? For example, Mitt Romney versus Obama, or Meg Whitman versus Jerry Brown. Very clever. Bruce.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Two points on that. If Mitt Romney had practiced dropping his G's, he'd probably be president now. If he had run about getting things done and fixing things, he probably would have been president. Second point is, I expect that this race is going to be more like what Judy ran into. I would figure that if Rauner wins on March 18th, on March 19th, he has more ads running that go after Pat Quinn. And Judy experienced this with Blagojevich, who had such a financial advantage that he defined her in April and May and June and July and August, and by the time he got into a September race, it was over. And if Rauner, I would expect, will have the wherewithal to continue to define Pat Quinn. There's going to be no break in the campaign.
Okay, by the way, Judy, you won that election.
I'm asking for a recount.
I don't blame you. There's nobody in this room who voted for Blagojevich in 06. We'd ask for a show of hands, but it'd be irrelevant. Okay. Mike Smith, Service Master. Are you a political consultant? Service Master, Disaster Restoration. Here we go. The district mapping process is completely out of balance. Your ideas on how this process can be changed to bring fair representation to the constituents. Kristen, as a South Suburbanite, formerly, go ahead.
Yes, I've been writing about mapping for a long time, and there's a push to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot to take this out of the hands of politicians, which is obviously what needs to happen. Even as I've been going through the endorsement process, I'm refamiliarizing myself with the map that was approved 2 years ago, and it's insanity. It is complete insanity. Like I mentioned earlier, you have representatives representing Streeterville who are also supposed to represent 79th and Halstead. And it's a skinny little district that runs along the Dan Ryan, designed to protect an incumbent and to pull that population. You know, they have to have a certain number of population, so you end up with a city of Chicago that looks like bicycle spokes. We should have had a constitutional convention, in my opinion, to address this matter. Many people came out against that. I think that was a huge mistake. And so we need to have, we need to amend the Constitution. And we've been editorializing in favor of that for quite some time.
Actually, I agree 100% with Kristen except for one thing. The honoree you're going to have tonight, Ed Burke, right? Mm-hmm. Last time I checked, he draws the city ward map. And Mike Madigan draws the rest of the state, and they work it out together. And until, and most people, and Kristen and Bruce and all of us know this, right? I mean, Mike Madigan draws the map. So that's it. He's the guy. Does he not draw? Anyone wants to stand up and testify that he does not draw the map? Okay.
Not automatically. He got to have control of the legislature and the governor's office.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I mean, there's a little.
Fine,
there's a
Peter,
law there, so to speak.
Peter Bensing is here. You got petitions on you? You carrying any?
Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Out of 3 of the legislative races, the last election,
Little louder, Peter. This is totally out of.
I am very happy to give this talk as loud as I can.
Make it short.
97% of the incumbents in the last election were reelected. 2 out of 3 of the races were uncontested. The voters don't pick the candidates. They don't pick the elected officials. The elected officials and the leadership pick the voters.
All right, Peter. Very well said. Of course,
And you're going to get everybody in the room, you're going to get them a signature
All right,
sheet,
Peter,
right? You got a
Peter.
petition sheet. Very good.
You need to, when it comes time, and someone offers you to sign up a petition to change the way we district in Illinois, sign it.
all right, Peter.
November, in the election,
Peter, you're filibustering. You're becoming like Senator Cruz. Sit down. By the way, of course, and I think Chris Roebling would vouch for this, if the Republicans had control of the map, it would be totally fair and balanced. Absolutely. Right, Judy? There would be absolutely all different, all purposeful.
Judy would draw it. We'd let Judy.
All right, let's get to a good Republican. Mark Weyermiller, got your question here. Perfect. Do you think Democrats, by the way, political party names are big capital, will pull, look at that, Democrats small d, Republican big R. Yeah, all right. Do you think Democrats will pull Republican ballots to vote Dillard over Rauner? Good question.
I'd anticipate that some will, particularly the unions. I mean, there's no primary. And whether or not that works, whether a call like that actually can do anything, I would defer to Bruce or Tom Donovan, who knows a little bit about politics. But I think clearly the unions are with Dillard, and I love that. The unions, Thompson, Edgar, Cellini, Shalander, together. Awesome.
I don't really have anything to add. We talk about crossover votes all the time, and I've just never really seen it happen, so I'm skeptical.
Right.
I agree with Kristen. And by the way, that lineup you mentioned, all those people, John,
Yeah.
that's when Republicans controlled the mansion. Since they were out of power, it's been all
It
Democrats.
was that was around the time I remember taking a Democratic ballot for Glenn Pichard and in Western Springs, and the whole polling place shut up.
All right, we have Eric Buck, Edelman and Gettleman Limited. By the way, you lawyers, very neat, really good. To the same issue wait a minute. This is about your endorsement for Tom Cross for treasurer. Knocking him for his vote on the pension reform bill, the Tribune gave Bruce Rauner an unqualified endorsement, making no reference to his position against the bill. Why the difference? Not quite sure I read that correctly. In the same issue...
I got it.
That's what I like.
Next question.
Go ahead.
As
You
Kristen,
do the question and the answer.
As Kristen mentioned, that there were no litmus tests on that balloting. Now, I think the people who were against the pension bill were for one of two reasons. One, they didn't want any pension reform, or they didn't think the pension reform bill was significant enough. That was Rauner's argument. I thought it was hard to accept that from Tom Cross, who had sponsored a very similar pension bill with Mike Madigan, and yet turned on that. So I thought that was more of a political calculation. But again, it wasn't enough for us to say he wasn't the better qualified candidate. It wasn't enough for us to say, look, we'd be a lot more enthusiastic about this if he had voted the other way.
All right, now for a little change of pace, this question is directed to you, John. Patrick Giordano. Having covered the Sochi Olympics so well, a little compliment, please comment on the situation in Ukraine. How many of you have been in that neighborhood lately? Go ahead.
The one thing that struck me, all right, I'll tell you, on the way back from Sochi, I was tired, and it was like a 33-hour flight or something, and I'm watching, there's an 8-hour layover in Moscow, and the only thing you could do is drink coffee, because if I drank anything else, I'd miss my flight. So I went outside, got some fresh air, and watched drunks falling off the benches. That's the entertainment there at night. I started thinking when I got back, maybe I should have gone there, to Ukraine. I really think I missed an opportunity. Jerry would have sent me, the Tribune would have sent me there. Mark would have said, yeah, go ahead. Have another day off on the column and get out. But the one thing that amazed me about this thing, there's a picture, I tweeted it, pardon me, a picture of a photograph of Orthodox priests standing between the protesters and the police. And not only Orthodox, Christian Catholics, my gosh, Catholic, the Catholic Eastern Rite people, and rabbis, and I think some imams too. People standing between them. I was so struck by that. It was so emotional because, I feel so sorry for them. But it looks like There's nothing we can do about it. Nobody wants to go to war. Going to war is what destroyed the Republican Party. You know, war is corrosive on many fronts, and one of it is it became the party of the war people, the war machine. And now it's undergoing a reformation. It'll probably take another several years. But yeah, I'm sorry for it. I don't have any answers for it.
Very good. We have two more questions. One will be just anyone, and then we have the wrap-up question from, well, we'll just go. Pardon me on the name. Is this Maria D. Amazuka? I can't pronounce it. Where are you, dear? That's what I would have gone there. Jose, I would have had that one. Okay, here we go. Basically, I'll paraphrase it. The whole question of minority voters, and we're not just talking about African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, all the stuff on the 2012 election showed that the minorities voted overwhelmingly for Obama, will vote for Democratic candidates. Maria says, we want honest candidates, period. And sometimes they're difficult to find. Well, you can listen to these guys here too. The question is, are the minorities locked in this race to the Democratic Party and Pat Quinn?
Go ahead.
I'm going to say yes. I mean, that's just been the pattern in this state and nationwide. I think the Democratic Party does a far better job at portraying itself as being the party of the middle class. That is something the Republican Party still fails to drive that message home. And so will minority voters wade into the other, I mean, I don't know how you can argue that under Democratic control, the state is moving in the right direction, but I think the overarching issue is that Democrats still capture that sentiment that the Democratic Party is the party you can trust.
Also, just on a technical level, the Sun-Times has been writing some, Jim, hey, pieces on the, that whole alleged slush fund deal. And it looks like that worked, huh? looks like that worked. You put precinct money out on the street right before the election. Was some of it to help and alleviate violence? Yes. That's a problem with big government programs, and other people take it and run with it. And you had clipboards and people getting the vote out. That's what I think. So I agree with Kristen.
I agree with them. I think there's a possibility of some transfer, some peel off based on the frustration level with people, and it's probably pretty high in the state. Abden is here from the governor's office. Abden, close your ears now, please. We have the third highest unemployment in the country. We're one of two states where average unemployment rose last year. Two states. Massachusetts was the other one. Their job numbers are much better than ours. You look around the state, Rockford, 13% unemployment, Decatur, 14%. Forbes named Rockford the third most miserable city in the country. That, to me, argues that unless there's some vast improvement before November, there is going to be a high frustration level that makes this a much more competitive race.
All right. Before I ask the last question, and we could go in either same order, but we didn't mention these people, two of them. We have Jerry Kern. Raise your hand, Jerry. The boss of the Tribune. Joyce Winnicky. Stand up, Joyce. Who every year reinvests my $99 so I get the book report, like my weekly reader, and that's great. And of course, the inimitable, with a tie and jacket, John McCormick, who writes many of the editorials. Stand up, John, so they all know who the SOB is. There he is. All right. I'd introduce the rest of you, but I don't know you, so there you go. That's how I do it. All right. Starting with you, Bruce, take 2 minutes, because this is a really good question. Stephen, SC Media, well, how do you pronounce your last name? Okay. Here's the question. One simple sentence. You can take longer in the answer, but the question's one sentence. Bruce, where will Illinois be in 10 years?
Well, is this where I can plug a new plan of Chicago jobs for the future?
Why not?
There's a thing on your seat.
This is the City Club.
March 25th, the Tribune has been a very extensive events series. Greg Burns, who is here, is going to moderate this next forum. We've got a great panel talking about where Chicago is going to find jobs in the future. That was a big focus of the New Plan of Chicago project that we did on the editorial page, to talk about how you will always have a crime problem as long as you have an education problem, and you will always have an education problem as long as you have half the children in Chicago growing up in single-parent families with all the economic stresses that are there. You have 35% unemployment in some neighborhoods of the city of Chicago, and a third of the kids still don't graduate from high school. 90% don't graduate from college. So we are, I think, we talk a lot about whether this is a budget issue at the city or the state. I think it's a survival issue. No, you're not going to argue that we're Detroit. We're not in that kind of thin economy, but our borrowing is so much higher than where Detroit is, that this really is an election about the future of the state. And it's not about balancing a budget. It's about educating everyone in the state and drawing in the jobs and creating an environment in the state that's actually welcoming jobs. I mean, you look at Indiana, incredibly low unemployment. You look at Wisconsin, that talked about how they've shored up government and welcoming people in there. We are falling behind. And I can't tell you with great certainty that in 10 years we're going to be much better off than we were. By most measures, we are worse off than we were 4 years ago when we last had this race for governor.
Sounds like a candidate, doesn't he? Go.
Bruce Dold for governor. I would argue that in 10 years, we're not just falling behind, we are so far behind the 8 ball. I mean, we just passed pension reform. Many other states did that 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. We finally got around to reforming Medicaid, but it's very slow. We're finally talking about redoing the school funding formula, a conversation that should have happened about 15 or 20 years ago. Everything that we seem to do in this state is on a pace that seems to be much slower than all of our neighbors. And so 10 years from now, I can just hope that we haven't built up so much debt that we can at least be holding steady of where we are today.
10 years from now, is Lisa Madigan governor? Because if it is, I just want to know now. Let me know.
Depends on if Michael Madigan is speaker.
Yeah, if Michael Madigan is speaker, he answers no.
Or she called him the speaker instead of dad, right? Years ago, I don't know what year it was now, I forget, 10, 12, in the 1400s, Byzantium fell. And the Byzantines knew, to the Ottoman Turks, and the Byzantines knew that their whole system was collapsing. They knew that they lost their way. They knew that their bureaucracy was strangling them. By the way, mostly, it was a Greek thing. I just wanted to mention that. They were powerless because they couldn't develop anything to overcome the inertia of the moment. There were attempts to do so, and they just couldn't do it. And so they faded away. And that's what I see here in Illinois. You all know more than me. You're all in business here. You're all part of this community. You know the deal, and still everyone's working their own angle, right? And you know what? If things aren't done now, people are going to vote with their feet. It's real simple. The middle class is going to go. They're just going to leave. You know that. You talk to your friends. I'm not talking about political people, but just people that, are outside of it, that ask you all, what's really going on. And after 2 drinks, you told them one time what's really going on, and they looked at you with horror, right? So you never told them that again. But that's where we are.
How about a great round of applause for our panel?